In year 1910, the most dangerous thing you could do in America wasn't robbing a bank. It wasn't murder. It was asking for a raise. For 50 years, American corporations ran a private war against their own employees. They didn't just fire you for organizing, they hunted you. They hired professional spies to infiltrate your meetings. They hired private armies to shoot you if you walked off the job. And they forced you to sign a legal document that stripped away your constitutional rights before you even punched the clock. They called it liberty of contract. History calls it the Yellow Dog Era. This is the story of how the right to organize became law and the brutal, bloody tactics corporations used to keep it illegal for as long as possible. Imagine you are a steel worker in 1920. You walk into the employment office. You are desperate. Your kids are hungry. You need this job. The foreman slides a piece of paper across the desk. It looks like a standard contract. But buried in the fine print is a single sentence. I agree that I am not a member of any labor union, and I will not join one while working here. This was the Yellow Dog Contract, and it was the most effective weapon corporate America ever invented. It sounds simple, but it was a legal trap. Once you signed that paper, joining a union wasn't just a fire-able offense, it was a breach of contract. If a union organizer tried to recruit you, the company could sue the union for interfering with a private contract. Federal judges would issue injunctions banning the union from even talking to you. And if you refused to sign, you didn't get the job. But companies knew that desperate men would sign anything and then organize anyway. So they needed an insurance policy. They needed to know who was whispering about strikes in the locker room. They needed spies. In the 1930s, General Motors paid the Pinkerton Detective Agency $419,000. That is over $8 million in today's money. They didn't pay it for security. They paid it for industrial espionage. Pinkerton agents were the CIA of union busting. They didn't just stand outside the factory gates. They went inside. Here is how it worked. A Pinkerton agent would get hired as a regular worker. He would work the line. He would drink with you after your shift. He would complain about the low pay. He would gain your trust. And every night, he would go home and type up a report on exactly who was complaining, who was charismatic, and who was dangerous. The next day, those men would be fired. But it gets darker. These spies were so good at their jobs that they often took over the unions they were sent to destroy. In 1936, a Senate investigation revealed a shocking statistic. Nearly 1/3 of all Pinkerton spies held high-level positions in the unions they were infiltrating. Think about that. The treasurer of your local union? A spy. The guy leading the strike chant? A spy. The man you trusted with your life? He was on the company payroll. They weren't just there to watch. They were there to sabotage. They would steal the union's treasury. They would incite violence to give the police an excuse to crack down. They would spread rumors that the strike was failing. The message to workers was clear. We are watching you, and you can't trust anyone. But despite the spies, despite the contracts, workers kept trying. And when they got too loud, the system stopped using lawyers and started using guns. The most brutal warning came early. Chicago, May 4, 1886, Haymarket Square. Workers across the city were striking for an 8-hour workday. Tension was high. 2 days earlier, police had killed 2 workers at a different protest. So a rally was called at Haymarket to protest police brutality. It was peaceful. The mayor of Chicago even stopped by and saw nothing wrong. But as the rally was winding down, a wall of police officers moved in to disperse the crowd. Suddenly, a bomb flew through the air. It exploded in the middle of the police line. 7 officers were killed. The police opened fire blindly into the crowd, killing at least 4 workers and wounding dozens more. Nobody knows who threw the bomb. To this day, it is a mystery. But the authorities didn't care who threw it. They cared about who they could blame. They rounded up 8 labor leaders, anarchists, organizers, speakers. Most of them weren't even at the square when the bomb went off. The prosecutor admitted in court that he had no evidence connecting them to the bomb. He said explicitly, "Law is on trial. Anarchy is on trial. These men have been selected because they are leaders." They were guilty of organizing. That was their crime. 4 of them were hanged. 1 committed suicide in his cell. The message of Haymarket was written in blood. Organize, and we will kill you, even if you are innocent. For 50 years, this was the reality. If you organized, you lost your job. If you struck, you lost your life. But then, the system broke. The Great Depression hit in 1929. By 1933, a quarter of the country was unemployed. The old threats didn't work anymore because people had nothing left to lose. Strikes exploded across the country. Violent, desperate strikes. The country felt like it was on the edge of a revolution. Enter Senator Robert F. Wagner. Wagner realized something the corporations didn't. If you don't give workers a legal way to fight, they will fight in the streets. He believed that the only way to save capitalism was to give workers a seat at the table. So he wrote a bill that would change everything. The National Labor Relations Act. The corporations fought it with everything they had. The Liberty League, a group of wealthy CEOs, spent millions calling Wagner a socialist, a communist, a traitor. They said the law would destroy the American economy. But this time, they lost. In 1935, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Wagner Act into law. It was a revolution on paper. For the first time in history, the United States government declared that you had a right to organize. The law did 3 massive things. It banned yellow dog contracts forever. You could no longer be forced to sign away your rights. It banned company unions, fake unions controlled by the boss. It created the National Labor Relations Board, NLRB, to punish companies that fired workers for organizing. Suddenly, the spies were illegal. The firing squads were illegal. The contracts were illegal. Workers surged into unions. In just a few years, union membership tripled. The middle class was born. If this were a movie, the credits would roll right now. The good guys won. The law was passed. But this is history. And in history, power never gives up. The corporations had lost the battle, but they were planning a long war. They waited. They spent 12 years lobbying, funding campaigns, and spreading propaganda that unions were too powerful and corrupt. In 1947, they struck back. Congress passed the Taft-Hartley Act. It was designed to gut the Wagner Act from the inside out. It was a brilliant piece of evil legislation. It didn't ban unions that would have caused a revolution. Instead, it just made them impossible to run effectively. It allowed states to pass right-to-work laws, which meant unions had to represent workers who didn't pay dues. This starved unions of money. It banned secondary boycotts. If a company was treating workers badly, the union couldn't ask other unions to stop handling their products. It isolated strikes. It required union leaders to sign anti-communist affidavits, giving the government an excuse to purge the most aggressive organizers. President Truman called it a slave labor bill and vetoed it. But Congress overrode his veto. The corporations had won. Fast forward to 2025. The Wagner Act is still technically the law. You still have the right to organize. But try it. Try organizing a union at Amazon. Try it at Starbucks. See what happens. You won't see Pinkerton agents with guns. You won't sign a yellow dog contract. The tactics have evolved. Today, companies hire union avoidance consultants. These are $3,000 a day, lawyers who teach corporations exactly how to break the law without getting caught. They will force you into captive audience meetings mandatory seminars, where they tell you the union will bankrupt the company. They will fire the organizers for being late or policy violations, knowing that even if the NLRB catches them, the fine is cheaper than a union contract. In the 1930s, they used spies. Today, they use surveillance algorithms that track your keystrokes and badge swipes to see if you are talking to other employees too much. The tools have changed. The goal hasn't. So, who paid for your right to organize? It wasn't a politician. It wasn't a judge. It was the miners in West Virginia who fought the U.S. Army. It was the steel workers in Pittsburgh who faced down Pinkerton rifles. It was the anarchists hanging in Chicago for a crime they didn't commit. They paid for it with their jobs. They paid for it with their freedom. And sometimes they paid for it with their lives. The system didn't give you these rights because it wanted to. It gave them to you because it was forced to. And the moment we stopped forcing them, they started taking them back. Subscribe to System Explained. Next week, we are going deep into the story of the child labor trap and why the Supreme Court fought to keep 10-year-olds in the mines. You don't want to miss it.